Mastering disaster recovery. Organizations ignore disaster protocols at their own peril, risking catastrophic business failure. How does the organization ensure that its stakeholders understand and follow established procedures for declaring a disaster and formally activating disaster recovery plans in the event of an actual disaster or outage, thereby enabling a swift and effective response to minimize the impact on business operations and maintain operational excellence? To ensure that stakeholders understand and follow established procedures for declaring a disaster and formally activating disaster recovery plans, the organization should implement the following measures. 1. Clear documentation. Develop and maintain comprehensive, easy-to-understand documentation of disaster recovery procedures, including the process for declaring a disaster, activating the disaster recovery plan, and the roles and responsibilities of stakeholders. The documentation should be readily accessible to all stakeholders and regularly reviewed and updated to ensure it remains relevant and effective. 2. Training and awareness. Provide regular training and awareness programs for stakeholders, including disaster recovery team members, IT staff, and business leaders. These programs should cover the disaster recovery plan, procedures for declaring a disaster, and the roles and responsibilities of each stakeholder. This will ensure that stakeholders understand their responsibilities and the procedures to follow in the event of a disaster. 3. Communication plan. Establish a communication plan that outlines the procedures for notifications, alerts, and updates during a disaster. This plan should identify the stakeholders to be notified, the communication channels to be used, and the timing of notifications. The plan should also cover the process for disseminating information to stakeholders, including the notification of disaster declaration, updates on recovery efforts, and notification of plan activation. 4. Disaster declaration criteria. Establish clear criteria for declaring a disaster, including the thresholds for service disruptions, data loss, or other business impacts. This will ensure that stakeholders understand the circumstances that warrant a disaster declaration and the subsequent activation of the disaster recovery plan. 5. Disaster recovery team. Establish a dedicated disaster recovery team with clear roles and responsibilities. The team should include representatives from IT, business operations, and other relevant stakeholders. The team should be responsible for declaring a disaster, activating the disaster recovery plan, and coordinating the response efforts. 6. Escalation procedures. Develop escalation procedures that outline the steps to be taken in the event of a disaster, including the process for declaring a disaster, activating the disaster recovery plan, and notifying stakeholders. The procedures should identify the decision makers and the criteria for escalating the response efforts. 7. Simulation and testing. Conduct regular simulation exercises and testing of the disaster recovery plan to ensure its effectiveness and identify areas for improvement. This will help stakeholders understand their roles and responsibilities and ensure that the plan is effective in responding to disasters. 8. Stakeholder engagement. Engage with stakeholders through regular meetings and updates to ensure they understand their roles and responsibilities in the disaster recovery process. This will help build trust and ensure that stakeholders are aware of their responsibilities and the procedures to follow in the event of a disaster. 9. Continuous improvement. Establish a process for continuously reviewing and improving the disaster recovery plan and procedures. This should include lessons learned exercises, post-incident reviews, and feedback from stakeholders to identify areas for improvement and implement changes as needed. 10. Senior management buy-in. Ensure that senior management is aware of and supports the disaster recovery plan and procedures. This will help ensure that the necessary resources are allocated to support the plan and that stakeholders understand the importance of following established procedures. 11. Regular plan reviews. Regularly review and update the disaster recovery plan to ensure it remains relevant and effective. This should include reviews of the plan's effectiveness, updates to procedures, and changes to stakeholders' roles and responsibilities. 12. Audits and compliance. Conduct regular audits to ensure compliance with established procedures and regulatory requirements. This will help identify areas for improvement and ensure that stakeholders understand the importance of following established procedures. By implementing these measures, the organization can ensure that stakeholders understand and follow established procedures for declaring a disaster and formally activating disaster recovery plans, enabling a swift and effective response to minimize the impact on business operations and maintain operational excellence.